Thank you very much, Lisa, and thanks to the Arab Organization for Human Rights in the UK for organizing this seminar. And I would like to sincerely apologize in advance for the fact that I will have to leave after my contribution because we have a major conference that's started now here in Dublin, which will center a lot on the same discussion among activists here in Ireland and in preparation for big demonstrations and mobilizations over the horror that is recommencing in Gaza, the genocide that is recommencing at the hands of the Israeli regime. So I do want to apologize, and I'm really genuinely sorry I won't be here to hear the other contributions, but hopefully I can listen back to them afterwards. Um, I think virtually every Palestinian and anybody who has any familiarity or looked honestly at the plight of the Palestinians know that since 1948, and indeed before, the Zionist project was predicated on a genocidal logic, which was the elimination of the Palestinian people from the land of Palestine. That's not, I think, a controversial assertion, even when you look at the writings of the founding fathers of Zionism. They were very clear in their own minds that to establish the Zionist project, to establish the Israeli state, that they had to eliminate the Palestinians, and that there was a genocidal logic of ethnic cleansing, which the Palestinians are very, very familiar with, and anybody who's honest about the history of Zionism in Palestine, I think, would have to say is undoubtedly the case, that there was a genocidal character to the entire project. But for most of the rest of the world, it has been veiled in various justifications that it was a land without people for a people with no land, that it was a civilizing mission of establishing democracy in the Middle East, or even in the aftermath of the October events and the genocide that we've witnessed, the horrific genocide we've witnessed for the last 17 or 18 months, that somehow Israel was defending itself against terrorism. Now, I think that the last 17 or 18 months have revealed to hundreds of millions, if not billions of people across the world who maybe didn't know much about Palestine, didn't know much about the history of this conflict, that all of those justifications are threadbare, and that what we've witnessed is a genocide, that there's no justification for it, that it is Israel's actions in Gaza have been driven by an absolutely barbaric, horrific, genocidal logic. Nothing else could explain the massacres that have taken place, the genocidal massacres, the destruction of Gaza, the fact that if all of this was supposedly a reaction to October the 7th, why then is there ongoing accelerating ethnic cleansing happening in the West Bank also? So the true nature of the Zionist project and of the genocidal character of that project has been revealed. But even still, there was a pretense of not admitting the truth about it. And there was an enormous reaction across the world. And of course, the heroic resistance of the Palestinian people against this barbaric genocidal campaign that we've witnessed did create pressure enough, I think, in the Western world to force the ceasefire on Israel, which it didn't really want to agree to. But now Trump, being elected, has dropped all the pretense. And Trump, with no longer is maintaining any pretense that there's any sort of moral compass driving either Western support for Israel or the Israeli regime. It's just very simply, we are willing to commit any level of atrocity. There's no red line. We are willing to massacre the Palestinians, and we are doing so with a plan to ethnically cleanse Gaza and to eliminate the Palestinians in the interests of Zionism and the strategic self-interest of the United States empire. And that's what I think Trump has changed the rules in that all the pretenses now are gone. And I find sort of grimly ironic about all of this is that the European Union and the European powers, who've also provided the means, the weapons, and the political justification over decades for Israel to commit the crimes that it has committed against the Palestinians, and indeed continue to arm it and provide excuses for it over the last 17 or 18 months of genocide, are expressing some shock at the Trump administration, mostly out of self-interest because of the threatened trade war that Trump is threatening against the European Union. But their double standards are even more starkly revealed, even though they are sort of vaguely horrified at the Trump administration. They're now using this as a justification for militarizing Europe. So there's a big push on now to demand that much more money is now spent on weapons and arms. And Trump has revealed, in a way that wouldn't have been admitted before, that America's interest in Ukraine had nothing to do with Ukrainian self-determination or horror at Putin's invasion, which in my opinion was a brutal, illegal, and unjustified invasion. But Trump has revealed that's not America's concern. America's concern is mineral resources in Ukraine, and their own self-interest is driving their foreign policy. And they don't really care who gets killed. They don't care about self-determination. And they most certainly don't care about the Palestinian people or the horrors that Israel is willing to visit on them. And that has now emboldened the Zionist regime and Netanyahu to say, right, we can restart the genocide. There's no holes barred. There's no red lines. We can do what we want. So it is a very, very grim and terrible situation that we are facing, where we really see empire and colonialism unmasked, and its real motives of just brutal might is right, brutal self-interest, the classical logic of imperialism revealing itself in its most brutal and stark form, and the Palestinian people facing a terrible price on top of the horror that they've witnessed over the last period. The only thing I can say by way of trying to strike a final note of optimism in the face of this is that this is now apparent. The terrible logic and the incredible double standards of the Western powers have been revealed in front of the eyes of hundreds of millions, if not billions, of people across the world who have taken to the streets in unprecedented numbers, demanding an end to this horror, demanding an end to Western complicity with the crimes that Israel is committing against the Palestinian people. And I expect that there will be massives on the streets here again in Dublin, and we've seen enormous demonstrations. I think we will see massive mobilization across the world in response to this restarting of the genocide against the people of Gaza. And certainly one of the things that we will be saying, as well as all the points that we've been making consistently, is that the Western governments are the enablers of this genocidal horror, that it is only the political support, the economic support, and the military support that is provided to Israel by Western powers that enables this horror to be committed. But we will also be pointing out to people, it's not just out of altruism that we should stand with the Palestinian people against this genocidal horror, but that the horrific logic that has been unleashed on the Palestinian people is now coming back to haunt the Western world itself, in that Western leaders are saying we must spend more on arms, more on weapons, money that should be going into housing and health and education and the many deep problems that exist in a very unequal and unfair Western world, dominated precisely by the sort of billionaires who are surrounding Trump at the moment, that in standing with the Palestinians, we are actually, ordinary people in the West are standing in their own interests, that they have a common interest with the Palestinian people in fighting this warmongering, genocidal, colonial horror show that is being unleashed by Israel and is being enabled by Trump and by Western governments. It seems to me that is the argument that we have to make here in the West, that ordinary people have no interest at all. In fact, they stand to suffer if the horror against the Palestinians continues, and that they have an interest in standing with the Palestinian people, because opposing the genocide against the Palestinian people in Gaza and more generally in Palestine is a fight literally for all of humanity. I think that is now being revealed in the starkest terms by the Trump administration, and that this is an existential moment where the world has a choice. Do we stand with humanity against this horrific genocidal logic, or do we allow this horror to continue, not just at the cost of genocide against the Palestinians, but where inevitably more horror, more warmongering, more brutality is going to be unleashed on the world unless we stand together with the Palestinians against this horrific logic that Trump is supporting and emboldening against the Palestinian people by the Israeli regime.
Thank you so much for your powerful words. Thank you. I have one question for you. So given the scale of atrocities and Israel's repeated violations of international law, isn't it time for governments to move beyond just condemnation and start taking serious action? Things like cutting diplomatic ties, pushing for Israel's suspension from the UN, sanctioning companies that continue to support it with weapons. What do you have to say?
Absolutely. And I'm sorry, I should have made all those points, but in a way, I suppose to many of the people on this webinar, they're obvious, but absolutely. In fact, Francesca Albanese, I met with her yesterday. She was here in Dublin. Interestingly, though, our government didn't meet her. They were too busy. The centre-right parties who've just been re-elected in Ireland were too busy to meet the UN Special Rapporteur, who was making exactly that point, as we will be making on the demonstrations here, saying that Trump is setting fire and Israel are setting fire to the international rules-based order and to international law. And these things will no longer have any meaning if we don't act against the genocide that Israel is committing and against the agenda that Trump is now setting out and, if you like, employing in justifying the crimes that Israel is committing. So we, on the streets tomorrow, will be again urging our government to enact the Occupied Territories, a bill that has been passed by the Irish Parliament, but which the government refused to implement, which would sanction Israel for its illegal occupation of Palestine. There's also a number of other bills that have received widespread, indeed majority support in Ireland, calling for sanctions, calling for the end of the facilitation of the sale of Israeli war bonds in Ireland, calling for the end of the facilitation of US military flights carrying weapons to Israel through Irish airspace, and many other demands for sanctions and an end to complicity or facilitation of the Israeli war machine or the US support for that war machine. So that is absolutely what we need to be demanding. But sadly, I have to say, our government, the sort of dominant parties who don't represent a majority, I mean, it's a sort of minority government. I won't go into the details of it. Majority sentiment is for sanctions being imposed, but the Irish government, out of deference essentially to Trump and fear of economic sanctions, are kowtowing to Trump. Instead of standing up to him, they are kowtowing to him. And they're being widely criticised in Ireland for that. But that's, if you like, where the battle is at here in Ireland, is saying, first of all, human beings and human rights are more important than perceived economic self-interest. But in actual fact, it is in our interests to stand with Palestine, to impose sanctions, because Europe is now using all of this as an excuse to spend more on weapons and to spend less on things like health and housing and education. So it will be to the detriment of Irish people if we don't sanction Israel for its egregious breaches of international law and human rights.